Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville, your host. Tonight is January 9th, 2017. So welcome to everyone who's listening to the show as opposed to watching the national championship. So thanks for being here. But anyway, January 9th, 2017, we're going to talk about a lot of different topics. One of the things I want to get into, of course, is the way forward for 2017, the demands that we have and the plans that we're trying to enact. The reason I thought it would be a good idea to bring that on board tonight is because we are nearing the end of the Obama administration. Hallelujah. We are coming to the end of Obama, at least as president. Although storm clouds are still gathering because we're nearing the Trump administration, and this is something to be concerned about. So this will not be, hopefully for the listeners of this show, a trip down reactionary lane, because unfortunately what happens is you tend to pick sides. Obama has been awful, probably the worst president the United States has ever had the misfortune of suffering under. But that doesn't mean that Trump is the good guy. And to be quite honest, if he's going to implement some of the policies that he hinted around at during the campaign, such as moving closer towards Russia, ending the war on Syria, stopping illegal immigration, a good dose of protectionism, then quite frankly, we're going to support him in that effect. So it's the question is, and the plan is not to be dragged in to reactionary politics and simply hate Trump because he's Trump or a Republican, the same as it is a bad strategy to hate Obama simply because he's a Democrat. There's plenty of reasons to hate Obama, plenty of reasons to hate Trump, their political parties, and the fact that the media is telling you to hate them for specific reasons is not the legitimate reason to do so. So basically what I'm trying to get at is if you have a sense of your program, of your guiding principles, of the demands that you want to make, you won't fall and waver on reactionary lane, because you won't be constantly chasing phantoms of racism or sexism. You won't be chasing whether or not the president is a Muslim and foolishness like this. You'll be focused on the demands. You'll be focused on a program. So the opportunities to hate the president will certainly be around in 2017, but the idea is that you're not constantly chasing ridiculous media-driven scandals and becoming a reactionary. And this is something we need less of, reactionaries. They're not beneficial to anybody. The answer is not Obama sucks, therefore Trump is great. We have to have our guiding principles. Once we've got that, there will be opportunities to fight, hopefully opportunities to support, although I think the opportunities to support are probably going to be a lot less than many of his supporters or previous supporters think they are. And of course, some alternative media outlets have sold out so far now. It's going to be clear that the guy would be able to launch World War III, and certain alt media outlets are going to support him. And it's also clear that he could bring peace on earth, and other alt media outlets would be against him. So this is what we're trying to avoid. We're not interested in any of that foolishness. Now, I just went on and on. I should remind everybody to catch Truth on the Tracks here on Monday nights, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, ucy.tv, and the show's replayed all throughout the week. You can also catch the show, which is being rebroadcast and reposted, not only at BrandonTurbeville.com, but ActivistPost.com has now started a podcast section, and they include my show in the podcast sections. And, of course, there's a number of other websites that post it up as well, and that's fine. I encourage everybody to do it. If you want to post up the archive of this show, post it up anywhere. Just send it out. I don't care. You have my permission to repost the show in the archives, and you can find it at BrandonTurbeville.com. With that in mind, if you're interested in my work, activistpost.com, naturalblaze.com, eraofwisdom.org, and BrandonTurbeville.com. That is the hub of my work. You'll find the articles there, links to the books. You'll find the archives of the radio show, interviews, YouTube videos, free books, books that you can pay for. And with that in mind, I would like to announce the fact that we have recently completed a major project. A new book on Syria that takes you from A to Z is now finished. And I can't give out the title just yet because we're finishing up on some things, and we are looking at getting this book out to a much wider audience than the previous works had reached. So good news on that front, and we hope to be able to announce the specifics in the next couple of weeks, if not next week. We'll just have to wait and see. So what are we looking at for 2017? And I am going to try to get into the Syrian crisis later, if I possibly can. But let's look at what we are going to argue for and fight for in 2017. I do believe now we have, 11 days left of Obama. And at this point, the reasonable strategy would be not to take our fingers off the trigger, not to keep our hands off the button here, because if you take your hands off the button, then something really drastic might happen. But the goal is to survive the next 10 to 11 days as we get into the danger zone of collapse, of imminent, not imminent, but the possibility of a collapse, some type of major military conflict, something to that effect, as the transition takes place. This is what happened in 2008 when Bush was president, and we saw the 2008 financial collapse just in time for Obama to take over and inherit it, and of course continue the policies of the Bush administration under left cover. Then you could see the continuation of the Obama left, or I would say the Obama policies under right cover or reactionary cover. So we are concerned about that. But of course, the idea is to keep pushing, always keep pushing, but to now look at what we're going to expect as a new Congress takes over, Senate and House, and a new president takes over. What are we looking for? Well, let's look briefly. We want to look at economics, domestic policy, foreign policy, all of that. We've got to look at that. And this is the idea is to have a set of guiding principles. This is what we are judging the president and the government on, right? This is our litmus test. It's not whether or not they're politically correct or they play basketball well. It's the question of what is your policy. Now, what we are trying to argue for, and I encourage everybody who's listening to the show to go pull up the article, A Real New Deal for America, 43 points. And one of the things that I want to point out here in terms of economics, we have passed the point of major bailouts of banks and financial institutions that we saw in 2008. We're now 8 years past that, but these types of things do continue to go on through backdoor channels. So one of the things we want to do is to end all bailouts of banks and financial institutions. We want to end the concept of too big to fail. Any money, public money, given to private banks to maintain solvency, it needs to be clawed back by a variety of available means. Banks that find themselves insolvent, they need to be seized by the FDIC for Chapter 7 bankruptcy proceedings. And I'm going through this because we are at the point where you could see a massive economic collapse just in time for transition, or possibly even shortly afterwards. So we'd want to see the seizure of these insolvent institutions by the FDIC, Chapter 7 bankruptcy, immediate triage of bank assets with the derivatives being separated and eliminated during the process. We also want to bring back The Glass-Steagall Act. We want to bring back the separation of banks, brokerage houses, insurance firms, etc. Bring back Glass-Steagall. We also want to see a ban on adjustable rate mortgages. I'd like to see a ban on credit default swaps. Both of these things are too dangerous in terms of our national economy. We want to enact a 1% Wall Street sales tax for revenue generation and for the purposes of discouraging dangerous forms of speculation, but particularly for revenue generation. And this is, let me go into the details here. The Wall Street sales tax should be applied at the rate of 1% to financial market transactions, and we're talking about stocks, bonds, flash trading, e-trading, high-frequency trading, debt instruments, the notional value of derivatives, of course. We'd want a reasonable exemption of $1 million per person per year that needs to be enacted in order to prevent the placement of taxes on individuals who shift around personal financial assets or make investments for their 401k or other retirement account. Once you get above $1 million per person, so remember, if you're married, you can do $2 million. Once you get above and beyond the $1 million mark, you're starting to talk about speculation. You're getting into speculation. But if we could look at that, we could adjust that up or down, but we'd say for now $1 million is a good mark. The 1% tax, it's got to be paid by the seller of the instrument, not the buyer, and the proceeds that are coming from the tax needs to be split evenly between the federal government and the states. The Wall Street sales tax at only 1%, we've estimated it to bring in anywhere from hundreds of billions of dollars to tens of trillions of dollars. So the 1% Wall Street sales tax is capable of funding the social safety net and the U.S. government, as well as effectively eliminating the budget deficit at the federal and state levels. All this can be done while discouraging dangerous forms of speculation and derivatives trading. The revenue from the tax, we want it to be used for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment insurance, SNAP, on-budget infrastructure spending, eliminating the budget deficit of the states and federal government. We want Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare to be raised. We want them to increase the payouts from these programs. We want them to reflect the current world situation, whether it's cost of living adjustments, inflation, etc. We also want to eliminate the individual mandate in Obamacare. Instead of Obamacare, we want Medicare for all. We want all Americans to have access to health care with a standard cost for the basic benefits of Medicare, right? Cost reductions for working and poor people, free for those people in poverty, but no mandates. And yes, of course, it gets cheaper as you go down the social ladder, the financial income ladder, and I think perhaps $50 to $100 at the most per person, getting cheaper and cheaper as you go down the economic ladder, but no mandates. And of course, that's not going to eliminate the private insurance agencies either. They can, if they want to compete, they can compete, and people with more money can go get those private plans for the better plans. But the basics of Medicare should be available to everybody. We want to increase unemployment insurance and SNAP benefits to reflect the economic situation. Again, inflation, cost of living, etc., but also to recognize the reality that we are in a world economic depression, 25% unemployment in the United States. We want to use the Wall Street sales tax to provide free college education to students who excel in high school for the duration of the college career. That's to students who succeed, not based on their race, not based on their gender, not based on their geographic location, based upon their success in high school. They should have an opportunity to compete in higher education with the wealthy. Now, we want to mention that because we want to fund these programs does not mean that we want a culture of dependency. The idea is that things like SNAP unemployment insurance, etc., should be there, but shouldn't be relied on for a lifetime. But when you're in a situation where you have 25% unemployment, it's unreasonable to tell somebody, go out and find a job, stop bleeding the system dry, when there aren't any jobs to find, or the jobs that are out there are so low wage that you'd be better off not working at all. So this is that would be unreasonable. Of course, once you repair the economy, go back to full employment, which we're going to talk about in a minute, then you can look at reducing the amount of people on certain programs. And this is, we're talking about general welfare programs here, which are the TAMF program, which we would like to eliminate. But again, that can't be eliminated in the current situation. You're going to have to repair the economy and provide opportunities for people before you can even talk about reducing programs like TAMP. Now, let's look. We want to increase personal exemptions and tax deductions for working individuals and working families. That's going to relieve the tax burden on working Americans. We want to require a 15% reserve requirement for all over-the-counter derivatives, which means you can't just trade and act as if there's nothing there. You've got to have at least 15% reserve. Immediately, we need to stop all foreclosures on primary residences, businesses, and farms for at least 5 years or for the duration of the financial crisis, whichever comes first, and we are still in a financial economic crisis. If an individual can get a signed note from a judge stating that the lack of payment to the bank was the result of economic hardship or illness or bank-based fraud, the bank cannot repossess. The bank must produce the note in any case of repossession. That's very important also. Now, we want to set a 10% maximum interest rate on all credit cards and payday loans. Enough fleecing the poor. We want to bring sensible and reasonable regulation back to the commodities markets by requiring a 100% margin requirement, position limits, reasonable anti-speculation protections that will prevent oil and gasoline spikes in price. And unfortunately, oil and gasoline are still incredibly important to the economy, and we can't leave our economy to the wolves of Wall Street and corporations. We want to restore individual Chapter 11. Of course, this is coming up. This is very important. We want to nationalize the Federal Reserve. You want to audit the Fed? Fine. You can audit the Fed, but what you're going to find is that the Federal Reserve is corrupt. Big surprise, right? We all know that the Federal Reserve is corrupt. What we're arguing for is the Federal Reserve to be seized by the United States government and placed under the U.S. Treasury. We can rename it the National Bank of the United States, and from this point on, the size of the money supply, interest rates, lending types, all that needs to be decided by laws debated and passed by the Congress and signed by the President. The U.S. government no longer would need to borrow from private banks or foreign countries. Use the inherent credit-creating power of the Fed or the National Bank to immediately begin lending for a variety of purposes that involve physical production and tangible improvement in the living standards of the American people. This means that the money being used needs to be used in order to jumpstart an economic recovery and to prepare a high-skilled labor force for a high-skilled future job market and create a culture of science drivers and human progress, agriculture, infrastructure repair, development, that sort of thing. We want trillion-dollar tranches to be issued from the National Bank for the purpose of repairing national infrastructure of roads, rail, government buildings, and everything like that. These tranches should come in the form of 0% interest, or I guess we could call them 100-year bonds or century bonds. Similar offers of credit need to be issued to refurbish our idle manufacturing and industrial infrastructure that's still sitting there, but we need to refurbish it. 0% interest credit needs to be issued for the jump-starting of private businesses, both large and small, from massive manufacturing operations down to the small mechanic shop and small restaurants. We need to maintain commercial credit for retail stores, launch a campaign of hospital rebuilding. All the jobs resulting from this money must be union pay scale. And we want to instate a Buy American clause in it for materials and supplies. The National Bank, the 0% interest credit, needs to be extended to fund a Manhattan Project-style scientific revolution, which is, we want to reach the level of progress and development that's going to see humans greatly increase our living standards, promote breakthroughs in health and science, promote space exploration technology, all while doing so in an environmentally friendly manner. The Manhattan Project level attempts to attain free energy, nuclear radiation cleanup, healthy non-meat meat for the future of a peaceful world, and other beneficial projects need to be launched with this credit. Now, the student loans, we want to refinance student loans through the New National Bank at extremely low or no interest to relieve the student loan debt burden. In terms of trade, we want at least a 15% protective tariff. We want to implement a 15% protective tariff on all goods that cannot be reasonably produced. That can be reasonably produced in the United States coming into the country. This is going to force domestic production. If 15% is not high enough to cause domestic production to increase, then we should increase the tariff with it. We need to renegotiate the trade agreements. CAFTA, NAFTA, GATT, these various other bilateral trade agreements that are so lopsided when it comes to labor and trade practices. We want to renegotiate them and end membership and participation in the WTO. Get out of it. We want to revive the Export-Import Bank. Use the power of the Ex-Im Bank to encourage and promote American exports across the world. We want to maintain our publicly owned facilities like Amtrak and the Post Office. These assets need to be fully publicly owned, fully funded, and upgraded. We want to reaffirm the right to collectively bargain for workers. Increase the minimum wage gradually. We want assistance or delays for smaller businesses at first, but we want a reasonable cost, a reasonable rate to around $15 per hour. And if you factored in all the calculations, the minimum wage, if it kept up with inflation and if it kept up with a number of other factors, it would actually be around $20 an hour. I think it's like $27 an hour, something outrageous like that. I think that is getting too far ahead of ourselves, but $15 an hour should be the minimum wage. Now, we want to immediately cease support for terrorism in Syria, and Libya, Iraq, Lebanon, Yemen, Ukraine, all other places where the United States is organizing and training and supporting terrorism and terrorist organizations like ISIS or Al-Qaeda or not neo-Nazis. We want that stopped. We want immediately to cease all provocations in Ukraine. We want to open the dialogue with the DPR and the LPR and express peaceful intent to Russia. Call a face-to-face meeting with the leader of Russia, Iran, Syria, to express a desire for peace in the region and the potential for cooperation and development. We want to get specific in terms of Ukraine. The DPR and LPR, to go ahead and declare them as a separate country. Allow Ukraine to function as an independent country, but one that stands neutral between Russia and the EU. We want to end our foreign wars and occupations. These troops are in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. Doesn't matter. We want them out, and we want them brought back home. That is not a difficult thing to do. It seemed incredibly simple to launch a war and to get our troops across the ocean to bomb, kill, and destroy, but I think we can manage to get them back across the ocean in an even faster manner. We want to return to the true meaning of the Second Amendment. Gun laws need to be abolished. Every American must be free to own a gun without respect to what state or city in which he lives. And if a city says, we want to ban this type of gun, the city should be told, you're in violation of the Constitution, back off. Now, we want to end illegal immigration. No border fence. This does not mean we're in favor of a wall. We don't need to go back to Berlin, but we don't want to blame the immigrants themselves. It's not the fault of the people themselves. They're just trying to get a better life. But they are being used to lower wages, to eliminate job opportunities, to lower living standards, to destroy a national identity and social cohesion, and we have to admit that. So we shouldn't ban immigration, but we should make it legal. We should make it controlled, and considering how we have to do it, considering the fact that we've allowed such unrestricted immigration to the country for so long, perhaps there could be a moratorium placed for a short amount of time. Any law requiring vaccination for adults or children needs to be struck down as in violation of the Constitution and the concept of human rights. We want to end that. Now, we will support the mandatory labeling of all genetically modified food in an interim period, because what we're arguing and demanding is a total ban. We want a ban on GMO cultivation, except for controlled scientific purposes, plants, not animals. No GMO product should be allowed in the open environment or the human or animal food supply. It's that simple. We want parity agriculture, parity pricing for family and small farmers. And at the same time, we want to crack down on speculators in the commodities markets to ensure that food prices stay down. We want to enforce monopoly laws to ensure that major corporations don't create or maintain monopolies over any particular industry. Careful consideration is going to have to be paid to the manner in which larger companies break up, so you don't have a giant company with just a bunch of subsidiaries, but it's going to have to be enforced. Taxes. Now, we want to remove property taxes on primary residences on individuals and families. So, remove property taxes on vehicles, one per person in the household. So if you're married with one child, you can have 3 vehicles, tax-free. If you're married with one child, you can have 4 vehicles, 3 tax-free, 1 is taxed. On your primary residence, you shouldn't have to pay taxes. It's that simple. If you live in a house that you own, you shouldn't be paying property taxes. But that summer home in Florida, you can pay taxes on that. We want to abandon all plans for carbon taxes or cap and trade. We want to engage in real environmental protections like cleaning up radiation contamination, mercury spills, oil spills, ending deforestation, that sort of thing. And of course, that it follows along that we want to legalize and encourage the production of hemp. We want to move toward the direction of hemp, not trees. We want to create a culture of freedom within the United States. We want to end unnecessary permitting and licensing laws and policies. We want to end mandatory insurance laws, get rid of CPS, DCFS programs that remove children from loving homes and put them into the state-sponsored pedophile rings. We want to end the war on drugs. We want to punish criminals for crimes, not substances. There can't be a victimless crime. So we want to end the war on drugs. Now, when I say legalize, essentially what I mean is we want people to be able to purchase, use, distribute, grow any kind of drug they want. It's that very simple. We want to end the DEA, want to end the BATFE. We can crack down on drugs being shipped in the United States from outside of the country, though, particularly by foreign elements who might have an interest in promoting drug abuse. But an individual has a right to consume whatever they want to consume, and therefore we want to see the end of drug laws. And that doesn't mean we want to have marijuana legal with a prescription of a doctor, or you have to have a card to get marijuana, or you have to get it on certain days, or you can only have a certain amount. No, you should be able to go to the store or whatever weed store or whatever you buy it from, buy your marijuana, smoke it, go home, whatever. You can grow your own plants. That's what we would. It's a novel concept, really. I didn't invent it, but it's just called personal freedom, and it's been around quite a while. The concept, not the actual application. So we want to require the housing authority to redirect its priorities. This is another thing. We want the housing authority to provide housing for the elderly and the disabled, not 20-year-old adults who have no prospects. This is not a fraternity home. It's not a young people's hangout. The housing authority should be provided for people who can't provide for themselves, the elderly, misfortunate, and the disabled should have these apartments. In general welfare and TANF payments, but we have to draw the economic crisis to a close. No cuts until the crisis has been averted, but when the crisis ends, we've got to end the culture of dependency. So no TANF, no general welfare. We want to direct the Department of Education to require schools to end sex education and death education, other failed-based socialization programs. At one point, we as a society did not expect a school or a teacher to act as the parent and teach children about sex, death, and socialization. At one point, they were to do their jobs and teach the language, teach math, teach science, and that sort of thing. And all you have to do is look at the results of your public schools, your PC training, confidence building, all that kind of foolishness. You can look at the results of your public schools and you can see that it has failed. So we want to end that type of education and focus on achievement and education. Focus on problem solving and logic and creativity and the basics of math and reading. That should be the main focus. And we also want second language skills. This is going to anger a lot of people who for some reason act as if a child learning a second language is a threat to their culture. We need second language skills. This is one of the only first world nations that simply is illiterate when it comes to another language. We can barely speak our own, but speaking other languages, we're extremely handicapped on that. And we've got the internet now, people. We talk to people across the ocean. It's important to be able to communicate with them. So we need, that being said, as our schools, our public schools get brought under control, our teachers and our schools need to be provided with whatever funding they need via the Wall Street sales tax and credit from a nationalized Fed. No schools that can't function because they don't have the equipment or the teachers are getting paid too little and because the students are out of control. No, we'll provide the resources they need. Now, again, this is something for Obama supporters. We want an immediate end to torture. We want to close Guantanamo Bay. We want to close Bagram Air Force Base, the detention center. We want to close the floating prison barges and other CIA torture sites, including the Chicago Police Black Site in Chicago, needs to be closed immediately. Now, Obama supporters might be surprised because they were crowing about 30 days into Obama's term that he had closed Guantanamo. Well, here we are, 2017 now, 8 years after he took office, and we're still torturing people in Guantanamo. We want to close that, though. Now, lead the charge in banning the use of depleted uranium in warfare. We want to repeal freedom-crushing and constitution-shredding legislation and executive orders like the Patriot Act, Domestic Security Enhancement Act of 2003, that was called Patriot Act 2, the Presidential Directive 51, some provisions of the National Emergency Act, provisions of the John Warner Defense Authorization Act of 2007, Military Commissions Act of 2006. We could go on and on and on and on. We want to start repealing that stuff. We also want to revamp FEMA so that's an actually effective emergency management agency and not a toss-up between a martial law agency or a colossal failure. So we want to make it to what it's supposed to be, which is an organization that actually is prepared for emergencies and not something Americans are either disgusted with or frightened of. We want to end constitution-free zones. We want a constitutional amendment that expressly provides the right to privacy. Now, that is the Fourth Amendment, which gives you a right to privacy. It's pretty clear, but since our levels of education have gone lower and lower and our IQs have gotten lower, that's not enough. So let's just have another constitutional amendment that expressly provides the right to privacy. The Fourth Amendment on steroids. Of course, we want to ban animal testing. We need to ban entertainment that involves the torture and mistreatment of animals, and end electronic voting, return to the paper ballot. If you can't read or write your name, you shouldn't be voting. So that's our list of demands. It's very short and sweet, but I want everybody to go look at the article, A Real New Deal for America, 43 Points, and that is going to be our guiding set of principles for the rest of 2017 and beyond. And for those of you who have written me with suggestions, we're going to amend this this document, and we're going to try to keep pushing for this document. But we're also going to look at the state level. A lot of people have been asking me what you do at the state level and what do you do at the local level. We are currently working on a program for both the state and local level. And once we've gotten all three levels of government taken care of in the United States with our demands, we're going to start working on really not only implementing them, but expanding them in terms of detail. So that is what you have to look forward to in 2017. Now, we can look at some of the recent issues that have taken place across the ocean now in Syria, because there's a number of these issues that I want to bring up. Erdogan recently, Turkey's Erdogan, has claimed to have evidence in the form of photos and video of the U.S. coalition support for ISIS. Shortly after Christmas, got kind of lost in the holiday shuffle, but we had Turkish president and terrorist supporter Recep Tayyip Erdogan making a statement accusing the U.S.-led coalition of supporting not only terrorists in Syria, but ISIS itself. He stated clearly that Turkey has proof that the U.S.-led coalition is supporting the notorious terrorist organization it claims to be fighting. On Tuesday, December 27th, Erdogan stated that, quote, they give support to terrorist groups including Daesh. Now they give support to terrorist groups including Daesh, YPG, PYD. It's very clear. We have confirmed evidence with pictures, photos, and videos. Now, he also called on GCC members like Saudi Arabia and Qatar to join Russia, Iran, and Syria in peace talks regarding the current crisis, saying that these countries, meaning the Russian coalition, have, quote, they show goodwill and given support to Syria. He stressed that Turkey would not take part in negotiations if terrorist groups like the Kurdish separatists were involved. Then we had the response from State Department spokesman Mark Toner, saying that his claims were ludicrous and that it has no basis for truth. He said, quote, U.S. is 100% behind the defeat and destruction of Daesh, even beyond Syria and Iraq. Now, Erdogan's statement is actually true, and Mark Toner, anybody who can operate a keyboard, knows full well about this. The United States and its coalition have long supported terrorists in Syria, and both have done it since day one. That being said, Turkey and Erdogan specifically have supported the same terrorists in Syria for just as long. For that reason, Erdogan's statements may appear startling if you take them alone. But the question then becomes, what is Erdogan's purpose behind those statements? After all, Erdogan has remained steadfast in the NATO camp ever since the beginning of the crisis, where he argued that Turkey only supported moderates, and he never acknowledged the fact that Turkey was buying ISIS's stolen oil and providing jihadists with porous borders so they could easily cross over into Syria. So why would Erdogan throw his NATO and GCC allies under the bus and actually spill the beans regarding the Western GCC support of terrorists? The answer is actually a number of possibilities. Some researchers out there are suggesting that Erdogan's stance is changing and that he's moving Turkey more into the Russian orbit and abandoning NATO and its position of destroying Syria, and that this is just beginning the process of dropping the U.S., the GCC, and NATO, dropping their baggage and exposing the imperialists at the behest of the Russians. Others attribute these statements to the just ravings of a madman lashing out at the slightest sign of criticism or political trouble. But these explanations, while they're possibilities, the reality is most likely that it's a complex web of intrigue that centers itself around Erdogan himself and the position of the Muslim Brotherhood that's caused Erdogan to make such a statement. It appears that Erdogan is attempting to sit on the fence between two world powers and their alliances, meaning the Western world hegemon and the Russian coalition. And at the same time, he's trying to promote his own neo-Ottoman vision for Turkey. Now, while Erdogan was firmly within the NATO camp at the start of the Syrian crisis, it's quite likely that Erdogan has started to realize chaos in Syria might very well equal chaos in Turkey, and that the U.S. support for the Kurdish fighters in Syria and Iraq might ignite Kurdish separatists in Turkey, which would throw his own country into chaos and civil war again. So Turkey has moved more toward the direction of Russia, despite having shot down a Russian jet and acted provocatively toward Russia in the past. Of course, Putin is using the carrot more so than the stick, which is a diplomatic strategy that tends to yield better results in the long run, particularly when the power bearing the carrot has a massive stick for backup, like Russia does. But for that reason, Turkey is willing to at least provide token support to peace talks and other Russian-led initiatives. But to suggest that Erdogan has actually moved into the Russian orbit, I think, is naive. Turkey continues to keep its borders open for ISIS fighters to cross into Syria, and it continues to maintain its safe zone area, which is nothing more than a forward operating base and supply line corridor, which we call the Jarablus corridor, for ISIS and its related terrorist organizations. As I mentioned earlier, Erdogan has been willing to risk direct war with Russia on a number of occasions, and the Turkish government has even announced support for terror brigades to be used on Russian territory, the Crimea. So Erdogan's neo-Ottoman dreams have become more and more obvious through his own statements, such as his vocal support for the Misak Milli, which is a series of decisions by the Ottoman Turkish Empire that saw Turkey claiming parts of Iraq, Syria, Armenia, Georgia, Greece, Bulgaria. He's even suggested the possibility of doing away with the Treaty of Lausanne, which delineates Turkey's borders. So Erdogan's willingness to throw his GCC allies under the bus most likely is compounded by his Muslim Brotherhood affiliations, which is a slightly more moderate form of Islamic extremism that calls for a referendum in Saudi Arabia and the rest of the Gulf. So it's for this reason that a rift exists between the Islamist Erdogan and the Wahhabist Saudis. But for beginners, it's the equivalent of, I would say, the democratic socialists versus communists. It's the same thing. One is just more radical, slightly more radical than the other. So as Erdogan's own plan of playing both sides continues, the situation inside his own country is most likely going to continue to deteriorate, despite his clever handling or masterminding of the recent coup that saw him eliminate many of his political and institutional enemies. As the domestic situation in Turkey worsens, Erdogan's likely going to face losses both in Syria and Iraq and will most likely move closer to Russia still. But as a result of that, the West is going to attempt to rein him in using the carrot and the traditional American stick. Domestically, his troubles might overwhelm him, or at the very least, overwhelm the stability of Turkey. So Erdogan is currently attempting a very delicate balancing act between two world powers, but delicacy is not what Erdogan is most skilled at. But regardless of all that, it's important to remember that Turkey is still very much a part of NATO and very much a part of the anti-Syria, pro-ISIS coalition. His recent statements regarding the coalition support of ISIS merely an attempt to bargain with the United States and gain brownie points with Russia, both designed to enhance his position for his own neo-Ottoman dreams. With that being said, we welcome Erdogan's newfound honesty, and we encourage him, if he has the photos and videos he claims he does, we want him to release them to the media immediately, and we call on him to do just that. Now, the White Helmets. Let's talk about the White Helmets briefly. Only a short time after the terrorist support group was thoroughly exposed and discredited by the alternative media, and they were nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, we now have the true nature of the organization on display yet again. This time the water crisis in Damascus is representing the fake humanitarian organization's time to shine. Shortly after the liberation of Aleppo, Al-Qaeda fighters in the Barada Valley outside Damascus dumped diesel fuel into the water supply to the city on December 22nd. Obviously, this made the water supply impossible to consume, and on the 23rd, the Syrian military launched a campaign to retake the area and restore the city's water supply. Now, we have information coming from Moon of Alabama. Photos were even posted online, according to Moon of Alabama, showing the water treatment plant rigged with explosives, but those photos were, according to the website, removed from the internet. Despite hostilities, the Syrian government is ready to send teams to restore water to Damascus, the lack of which only punishes civilians and holds a vast number of people hostage under the possibility of thirst. Terrorists, however, are denying access to the site, and instead they're offering to allow teams access to the facilities on the condition that the Syrian military and Hezbollah end their military siege of the city. So in effect, the terrorists are holding the people of Damascus hostage for military gain. That terrorists would hold civilians hostage is not surprising, but for a lot of people, it might be surprising the fact that the White Helmets have openly released a statement of solidarity with Al-Qaeda in Barada and Damascus. We have tweets released by civil groups and activists demanding an end to Syrian military operations around Damascus in exchange for drinking water to civilians, bearing a number of signatures from a number of different organizations, one of them being the White Helmets. You can look at it and see the signatures and emblems at the bottom of the statement, and the emblem of the White Helmets is clear. So the White Helmets have signed on to a document produced by terrorists and standing in solidarity with terrorists, holding civilians in in Damascus as hostages, and apparently suggesting that they have some control or at least some sway over the situation. So the organizations who make an offer to lift the water blockade of Damascus obviously think they have the power to do so, right? So they must be held responsible for keeping the blockade up. They also have the intimate relations with the Al-Qaeda fighters who currently occupy the damaged water facilities. We know the U.S. and U.K. government created and paid the White Helmets. I guess they did that. I guess they're impartially, neutrally, and for all Syrians blocking the water supply to 5 million Syrians in Damascus. The U.S. military and CIA officers run the operations room in Jordan and Turkey, of course, that direct that insurgency. So this all increases the suspicion that the blockade is part of an organized response by enemies of Syria to the recent liberation of East Aleppo, and I think that's absolutely clear. But the White Helmets obviously are nothing more than a terrorist support group that's known to many within the alternative media for quite some time, but the recent stunt should remove all doubt as to where the fake humanitarian organization's loyalties lie. If there was any doubt before, I suggest reading my previous articles on the group as well as Vanessa Beeley's excellent work on the same topic. I'm going to give you a list of articles here that I want you to go check out or Google, and then if you're interested in the White Helmets. So I'll give you my articles first. The Real Syria Civil Defense versus the White Helmets. MSM attempts to promote White Helmets while hiding Syria Civil Defense. More fake news from corporate press. White Helmets NGO, a rescue and assist operation under guise of human rights. And White Helmets video and supporters demonstrations confirm lack of credibility. And then for Vanessa Beeley, the Real Syria Civil Defense exposes fake White Helmets as terrorist-linked imposters. The White Helmets Black Record. Vanessa Beeley talks to RT about French government collusion with Al-Qaeda-linked group. And who are Syria's White Helmets? Please go check them out. Now, one last thing about, maybe we can get two more things in about Syria. Ken Roth of Human Rights Watch. This guy and his organization have managed a number of just brazen failures in their attempt to support the Western-backed terrorists in Syria. They've used photos of cities the U.S. has bombed in order to blame Assad for bombing them. They've attacked Syrian nuns who try to correct media propaganda. And basically, Human Rights Watch has made a name for itself as one of the loudest shill organizations originating out of Soros land. But Kenneth Roth is now in a race with his own organization to see who can discredit or humiliate himself the most. I guess he's banking on the short attention span of his audience. Roth's Twitter account is now becoming a display of hypocrisy and propaganda and contradictions, which are ripe for mockery for anybody who visits it. Going back over a year now, Roth tweeted an absurd statement. This is what he says, quote, Assad released jihadist Zaran Aloush from jail June 2011, part of effort to taint uprising, end quote. So he's suggesting a conspiracy theory that Bashar al-Assad released Jaish al-Islam terrorist Aloush so that Aloush would radicalize the opposition, who were already slaughtering and torturing civilians, as well as demanding extreme Sharia law, so that he could then crack down on the opposition, which he was allegedly already cracking down on, and use the radical nature of the opposition to justify his crackdown. So Roth is suggesting that Assad would multiply and militarize a peaceful revolution he was already cracking down on just for public relations. That's a difficult pill to swallow unless the audience is inhabiting the place located as far away from reality as Roth himself. By that logic, I guess you could say that Obama released Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi from Camp Bucca in order to create ISIS, right? So we had another tweet just a few days before that. Roth tweeted this. He says, quote, killing Zaran Aloush is part of Assad's strategy of trying to reduce choice to him or ISIS, end quote. So he's compounding and contradicting his own conspiracy theories. So now he's suggesting that Aloush was a moderate and thus part of the moderate opposition. He later claimed that Aloush was intentionally released in order to poison that very opposition. So this is a man who led Jaish al-Islam, his organization notorious for rape and torture and beheadings and other acts of savagery against both the Syrian military and civilians. Only days before, he claimed that Aloush was a poison pill of terrorism, suggesting he was a moderate leading moderates. So the question for Roth then becomes, which conspiracy theory do you really believe, the first or the second, or either? We don't believe either. So I could go on and on about Human Rights Watch, and we've got a couple more minutes, so perhaps I will. This is not the first embarrassingly obvious fail for Human Rights Watch or for Ken Roth. On February 25th, Human Rights Watch posted a photo of a devastated civilian area in Syria with the tagline, Syria dropped barrel bombs despite ban. And that ban that they're referring to is the ban on bombing civilian areas that applies to both sides in Aleppo after the United Nations stepped in to save the Western-backed terrorists from annihilation the first time, or maybe the second or third time. I can't remember which time it was. But Assad's forces had surrounded the city and cut off a major supply route for the death squads from Turkey, thus making the ultimate elimination of the terrorists an inevitability. And we can see that now it was an inevitability. But there's only one problem with Roth's and Human Rights Watch's tweet. The photograph they used was not Aleppo. In fact, the damage hadn't even been brought down upon that civilian area by the Syrian military. It was the United States. It was actually a photo of Ain al-Arab, which most people know as Kobane, the Kurdish name, which means company. But the city had been the heavy side of U.S. bombing over the months prior, and the U.S. was, of course, just engaging in death squad herding and trying to dig out the borders for that Turkish safe zone. So while Human Rights Watch was content to use the destruction of Ain al-Arab as a reason to condemn Assad and continue to promote the cause for U.S. military action in Syria, the Human Rights Organization, their Human Rights Watch, was apparently much less interested in the exact same destruction wrought by U.S. forces. So, in other words, if Assad's forces bombed a civilian area into the Stone Age, it's an atrocity, a war crime, a justification for international military involvement. If the United States bombs a civilian area into the Stone Age, it's no biggie. So perhaps we'll dig more into Human Rights Watch later. But I want to read something else. We have an article by me. It's on BrandonTurbeville.com, ActivistPost.com. Leaked tapes reveal John Kerry admission U.S. was pulling for ISIS against Assad, Russia only fighting terror. Let me read the quote of John Kerry first, because I don't want to run out of time. I want this on the record. This is what Kerry says in these leaked tapes. The reason Russia came in is because ISIL was getting stronger. Daesh was threatening the possibility of going to Damascus and so forth, and that's why Russia came in, because they didn't want a Daesh government, and they supported Assad. And we know this was growing. We were watching, we saw that Daesh was growing in strength, and we thought Assad was threatened. We thought, however, we could probably manage that Assad might then negotiate, but instead of negotiating, he got Putin to support him. So, it's the important part. It was released by WikiLeaks. It was John Kerry's statements that he made in a meeting at the Dutch mission of the United Nations on September 22nd. It was a meeting with the Syrian opposition, the lounge lizards in Europe. So the mainstream media either refused to report on the leaks at all, or they eliminated most of the incriminating parts of the tapes. I believe CNN even deleted it from their website and claimed that people who were involved were upset that it was released. Well, it's a hell of a news organization. CNN is rapidly exposing itself for being the big corporate piece of shit that it is to the world. I mean, what news organization is worse? NPR, I believe, is starting to lose the race to CNN. But anyway, Kerry is openly stating that the United States sat idly by while ISIS grew and grew and grew in order to force Assad to negotiate. Not because they didn't want to go to war, but because they wanted to force Assad to negotiate. Now, to be clear, Kerry did not state that the United States funded, directed, or directly supported ISIS, even though that's easily documented by previous leaked documents and simple facts on the ground, circumstantial and otherwise. But he did clearly admit that the United States knew ISIS to be growing in Syria, but did not do anything to stop it or oppose it because the U.S. wanted to use it as a bargaining chip in order to make the secular, democratically elected President Bashar al-Assad negotiate, which of course simply means stepping down and allowing a proxy president and Western-backed terror coalition take his place. Now, his statement might not be the "we control ISIS" admission that many people are looking for, but it's important to note that Kerry is admitting to fighting on the same side as ISIS. Remember, ISIS was fighting Assad. America was pushing against Assad, even threatening direct and open war against Assad. America's rebels were also fighting against Assad. So at the very least, his statement is an admission that the U.S. and Daesh were on the same side and that the U.S. was pulling for Daesh in its battle against Syria. And it's also an admission that the State Department's ludicrous claims that Russia entered Syria merely to protect a dictator and expand its own empire are completely and utterly false. Kerry clearly admitted that the reason Russia entered Syria was to prevent a Daesh government in Damascus. So would any reasonable person disagree with Russia's goal? We think not. So, that being said, does this also mean that the U.S. did support a Daesh government in Damascus? After all, it wasn't the prospect of Daesh that Kerry was worried about. It was the prospect of a continued Assad government. So in more simplistic terms, Russia wanted to prevent Daesh from taking over Syria, while the U.S. wanted Daesh to continue its war on Assad, so Assad would step down. These are damning statements, to be sure. But we've run out of time. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll pick up where we left off next week and hopefully have the opportunity to really start pushing forward on our demands. So we'll be back next week, ladies and gentlemen. This is Truth on the Tracks. I'm Brandon Turbeville. We'll see you next week.
My name is S.M. Gibson, and I am the host of Anti-Media Radio on UCY.TV